What's up guys, Gabriel Varga here. Today we're going to be talking about one of the big issues, one of the big problems in MMA, and that is fighters not making weight. When people are not getting on the scale and fights are falling through, this is a big issue. So what penalties should the UFC, Bellator, ONE FC, what should they be imposing on fighters who don't stick to their contract and don't show up on the scale at the agreed upon weight? That's the subject today. Stick around, we're going to get into a bunch of little details that I think could solve this issue. Alright guys, I've already put out 2 episodes on weight cutting. This one is just more my opinion on what can be done to really hurt fighters who are not making weight, what's going to stop them from continuing to do this over and over. And right now it's very close to my heart because I just trained for 15 weeks for a fight to show up, have my opponent come in 5 pounds overweight, and all the work that I put in is just kind of down the drain. Yes, Bellator paid me my show money. That is amazing of them. I really appreciate it. It would have been nice to compete and get the win money, and even more importantly, it would have been nice to build that MMA record, because for myself, my kickboxing record is good. I'm fine. You know, I can fight out the rest of my career and I don't have to worry about padding that. It's just a matter of, do I want to add more belts to it? But for MMA, it's very important for me to get another 4 or 5 wins so that I'm actually recognized as, you know, he's a pretty good MMA fighter. He has that one loss, which was a split decision, yes, but he's right up there. So currently, and it changes state to state, country to country, there is a fine for not making weight. And that ranges between 20%, that's what would have happened this week if I would have chose to compete against my opponent who came in overweight. I would have got 20% of his purse. I've heard it going up to 30%, but I've never heard of anything more than that. And if we look at boxing, they actually sometimes in the contract, they work in penalties, and it starts becoming a substantial amount of money. I have seen times where it's 10% of the purse for every pound over, sometimes even more extreme than that. So if somebody, for example, this week when I fought, would have come in 5 pounds overweight, they would have been sacrificing 50% of their purse. And you can guarantee yourself that in that last 30 minutes, 40 minutes, when somebody's going, I'm not gonna make weight, why should I even bother cutting more? I might as well just start resting up now and stop this process. If they know that every pound is gonna cost them 10% of their purse, they will be getting back in that sauna and cutting the weight. Now, of course, the issue here is if you're fining 10% per pound, it's very different for somebody at 135 coming in 1 pound overweight as opposed to a heavyweight who comes in 1%. So there would probably need to be some way to correct that. You know, maybe a lightweight, if he comes in a pound overweight, it's 15%, and a heavyweight, a pound overweight, is more like 7%. And then in those weight classes in between, you kind of breach the gap and you find nice numbers that really work. But overall, 20 to 30% is really not making a difference. And especially for these fighters who are showing up and they're getting half show money and half win money, if they're losing 20% but they get the win, they're still picking up that extra 50% of their purse. So at the end of the day, they're not really missing out on too much. They still take home 80% of their purse. But if the playing field was leveled out a little bit, if we took a few extra little elements and penalties and imposed them on that fighter who missed weight, it might make it that much more difficult for them to get the win. And then without the win seeming a little bit more guaranteed because they have that weight advantage, all of a sudden they're going, oh shoot, if I only get 50% of my purse and then they dock 20% of that, then I'm more down to like 40% of what I would have got if I got the win. And that is when it starts to hurt them. Now, in my opinion, 20 to 30% of somebody's purse is just not enough. People are going to show up and they're going to be fine with losing that as long as they get their win. So we want to find something a little more extreme. Now, Israel Adesanya was recently talking about taking 90% of people's purses if they miss weight. That's not going to work, because as soon as somebody goes, oh, I'm not going to make weight, they'll just go, there's no point in fighting. Why would you fight for 10% of your purse? Why would you risk the loss? Why would you even bother at that point? So there'd be too many fights falling through. But if we jump from, let's say, 20 or 30% to 50 to me sounds reasonable. If I didn't make weight and they said, oh, you're taking 50% of your purse, and let's say you're getting something like 30 grand, you're going, oh, now I have the choice to fight for 15,000 or back out and get no money. I think most fighters would still go, you know what? I'm going to go for the win. I have the weight advantage and I'll just take half my purse. But they're not going to make the mistake again. So I think, first of all, 50% is a very good number to start at for missing weight. So let's talk about what penalties we could impose on fighters aside from just attacking their purse. So the first penalty that I think that you could impose on fighters is changing the weight of their glove. Now you might think, oh, this is new, I've never heard of this, but it's not new. When I was really into watching K1 Max, that was an element that they had implemented, normally fighting in an 8-ounce boxing glove, but if somebody missed weight, it goes up to a 10-ounce boxing glove. Now that might not sound like a big difference, but it's surprising how much that 2 ounces of padding can make the glove that much softer, that much less impact. I've fought in 6-ounce gloves, I've fought in 8-ounce, and I've fought in 10-ounce. And I can tell you that a 10-ounce glove is much nicer to get hit with than an 8 or a 6. Those little jumps make a difference. So if we went from a 4-ounce glove up to a 6-ounce glove and we put in a little bit more padding, I think that would be great. It levels the playing field out a little bit. When you get clocked with that shot with a 4-ounce glove, it must really hurt. A 6-ounce will take a little of the sting off and might make it that much more difficult for the heavier fighter who didn't make the agreed upon weight to actually knock out his opponent. It will be more difficult with that bigger glove, and I think that is a very fair rule. I think it's something that all the promotions should start implementing. You come in overweight, you fight in the bigger glove. Now, something else that was brought to my attention, a penalty that I think would be amazing to implement, would be to take a point deduction off the guy who does not make weight. And I love this one because, yes, you know, taking somebody's money, that's fine. You know, it hurts and everything, but guys keep doing it because they know, oh, I have the advantage and I can still win my fights. And when I win my fights, I consistently get more money. But if you start giving them disadvantages, like number one, taking away the knockout ability with the slightly larger glove, and number two, you start hurting them on the point system, right away they know on the scorecard, as soon as the fight starts, oh shoot, I'm behind. Now, that, yes, it might give them more incentive to go for the KO, but they're already the bigger guy. They're probably already thinking that I can manhandle this guy and get the KO. So a point deduction, 1 point only for the whole fight, I think is something very fair. And that now we have really started to level the playing field, because when you sign your fight contract, you have 2 jobs. And I've already said this in my previous videos. Number 1 is make weight. Number 2 is to fight. If you don't make weight, you miss the first agreed upon thing, of the contract. That's very important. That, to me, that's something that you should honor. So if you're not going to do that, there should be 3 points of pain for you. Number 1, you're getting hit, 50% of your purse. Number 2, you are going to be fighting with slightly bigger gloves, which gives your opponent the knockout advantage, even though you're heavier now. And number 3, right from the get-go, you have already lost 1 point. So maybe at the end of the fight, they subtract 1 point from your scorecard, from your side of the scorecard, and then you can tally up the result. Now, this will end up in more draws, possibly, but I was just saying the other day when we were watching one of the fights at Bellator, I think there needs to be more draws in MMA anyway. I think it's very unfair when just this past weekend there was one guy who was 11-0, there was one guy who was 24-0. It was a razor close decision. It could have gone either way. I mean, I think the judges were just, flipping a coin almost, and one guy walks away with a loss. And a loss is not the same it's not the same as a draw. If you look at a lot of boxers, they say undefeated, but they have a couple draws. It just kind of gets ignored. So I think that having more draws in MMA is fine, and with that point deduction, that will end up accumulating to more draws, but no worries, in my opinion. Now, of course, the idea has already been thrown out a number of times in combat sports that, a lot of people who don't like weight cutting just say we should just scrap weight cutting altogether and everybody should just weigh in, an hour or 2 before the event starts. Your weight is your weight. You show up at your normal weight, you fight at your normal weight, you weigh in at whatever you are. And I love that idea, but the issue that's going to arise is because weight cutting is already grandfathered into the sport, there are still going to be people who try to make that last minute cut, who come in heavy, and then last minute fights are getting canceled left, right, and center. So the promotions are not going to go for that. But the penalties and imposing the penalties, giving those fighters a disadvantage, really dissuading them from making that mistake again, I think that will be the difference. That will be what changes the sport around. And promotions like ONE FC have already started making changes, making it very difficult for you to cut water weight. They're checking your hydration levels throughout the week, which I think is amazing. It's the start of a good change. Over in North America, we need to catch up. I'd say we're behind in the weight cutting scheme of things. But athletic commission starting to impose these restrictions and penalties on fighters, that is going to be what makes the big difference. Now, what I'd like you guys to do, if you're into it, is throw in the comments below and let me know other ideas that I may have missed, because I kind of want to get a few more ideas together and send them off to the promotions. Maybe they can forward them on to the athletic commissions, because who knows, maybe this just hasn't really been talked about. You know, weight cutting, like I said, is being grandfathered in. People just go, oh, we'll give them a 20%, 30% deduction on their purse, and we'll just leave it at that. But it might be time to evolve things. So if you guys have some more ideas on penalties that would make the fighters not want to cut weight and miss weight, let me know, because I think it would be very healthy for the sport, very healthy, much safer for the athletes if everybody would just come in on weight. Everybody would start recognizing that, oh, you know what, I'm having a lot of trouble making that weight class. Maybe it's time to jump up a little bit. And overall, I think that UFC and a lot of the big MMA organizations, they do need to add more weight classes. When you start doing 15-pound jumps, it becomes very difficult for somebody to decide, oh, you know, should I move up or should I go down? Because making the jump up is just too substantial. If it was 10 pounds, you know, we had a 135, a 145, a 155, a 165, a 175, so on and so forth, till you start getting to the heavyweight classes, then you can do bigger jumps. I think that would be smart as well. So I look forward to seeing your guys' comments below. Look forward to hearing what ideas you might have. Again, it's a subject very near and dear to my heart. I've been talking about this for a long time. It's not just this weekend where I sort of got passionate about it. Every time I sit down and I watch a UFC event, a Bellator event, a ONE FC event, and I see people miss weight, I just get so upset, and I start talking to whoever's in the room with me. I'm like, how are these guys missing weight? How do you come in 5 pounds overweight? How is that possible? How are you not just getting cut from the promotion for letting that happen? So this is just my chance to vent and hopefully help initiate some change and help the promotions recognize that it's time to make a few little alterations to the system and really hurt people who are not taking the agreed upon weight in the contract seriously. All right, guys, like I said, I am still under quarantine. I'm locked down here, so you will have lots of YouTube videos coming. I'm done ranting about the weight cut issue now, so we will move on to more tutorials and other subjects. Make sure you get subscribed if you haven't, so you can keep up with all the content, and I'll see you guys back here soon for another video.